Hi guys, this is Joel Kennedy with Kennedy Violins. There are a million different types of strings you can put on your violin. At least it seems like it, right? Well, today I'm going to try to make it really simple to try to figure out which ones to put on your violin. Okay, so I'm just basically going to try to do an overview of the three types of strings. I'm going to tell you who usually uses them, who might be recommended to be using these strings, and the pros and cons for each string. Okay, so first of all, you have gut strings. Now, gut strings are usually played by people who are more advanced players. They're probably playing traditional music, Baroque music. Now, some of the pros of the gut strings is that they're often considered to have the best sound. The sound quality generally is very warm and sweet and very just kind of pleasant. Now, the cons to gut strings would be that they generally don't last as long. They definitely have a shelf life. They tend to, because they're more stretchy, they go out of tune more often. So that's kind of where that more advanced player comes in. You have to be a person who's comfortable with, tuning the strings more to keep them in tune. And they also can tend to be a little bit more on the more expensive side. And generally, the gut strings would not be considered to be powerful strings. So a lot of modern music, modern concertos are very forceful and very energetic, and you need to have very responsive strings, powerful strings, strings that can, throw your sound out to a large auditorium. Gut strings are not really great for that. Like I said, they're mostly chosen for traditional music, Baroque music, which is, that's not usually the style of that kind of music. Now, some examples of gut strings would be like Pirastro Eudoxa strings, also the Gamut brand. Maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, I don't know. But these are probably two of the most popular and commonly known gut strings that are out there. Okay, so next on the list would be a steel core strings. Now, the steel core strings are, as far as their construction, are just as they say, they have a steel core, and usually the steel core is wrapped up in some kind of metal. And the people who are usually using these strings are a lot of folk musicians, a lot of fiddlers, a lot of people who might be in a band. And of course, they are also very good strings for beginner type of players. So that takes me on to the pros and cons. So the pros of these steel core strings are that they tend to be less expensive. They tend to be more durable, they tend to be more stable, and they tend to, stay in tune, so there's less maintenance. And also they kind of last longer in terms of the sound degradation, so the sound would degrade the least. And these strings are mostly recommended for beginners because they last a long time, because they're easier to tune, because they're responsive and they're easier to play. It's a very great choice for beginners. Now, the cons would be that the solid steel core strings tend to have less warm sound, right? So the sound is usually less warm, less sweet. It tends to be more bright, more brash. So if you're looking for that sweet, warm sound, it's going to be more difficult to produce that sound with the steel core string. Now, some examples of some very popular solid steel core strings would be like the D'Addario Prelude string, which at Kennedy Violins, actually, we put on all our violins that we sell around the United States because it's a really solid string, and it sounds very good for a solid steel string. So preludes, and also helichors, those are also very, very popular, especially with fiddlers. Okay, so the third type of string would be the synthetic core string. Now, the synthetic core strings, as far as construction, has a synthetic core and it's wrapped in some kind of metal. Sometimes the metals are kind of exotic too. Now, the synthetic core, I think, is mostly to try to mimic gut. So the synthetic core strings are really trying to be a compromise between a pure gut string and a solid steel core string. Now, most of the people that are using synthetic core strings are going to be orchestral players, usually people who are intermediate to advanced. Now, in terms of the pros for these strings, they often can produce that warm, sweet sound, but also be powerful and responsive and easy to play at the same time. Now, the cons of these strings would be that they are more expensive generally than a solid steel core string. They generally are not as durable. They do stretch a lot more when you initially install them on your instrument. So, after a couple days, you're going to be turning your pegs quite a bit to keep them in tune for the first couple days, and then they finally stabilize. But they're generally not as stable as a solid steel core string. They generally don't have as good of a shelf life. And in terms of the quality of the sound and how fast it degrades, that's usually a fair amount faster. So while not all synthetic core strings are more expensive than all steel core strings, you may end up paying a lot more money in the long run, or at least every year, because you're replacing the strings more often. So a steel core string, you might be able to go 8 months or a year sometimes without replacing the solid steel core string. But a synthetic core string, if you're a professional, you might be replacing them, every 3 to 5 months, maybe even sooner. The biggest reason is because they do two things. One, the sound quality can change quite a bit. From when you initially installed them on the instrument, 3 or 4 months later, that sound quality might go down quite a bit. They can also go false. So when a string goes false, you literally can't tune them. You can get them pretty close to your target pitch, but you can't get them like perfect. And so then you just have to replace the string. So you could end up having to, buy, twice as many, sets of strings, in a year. Now, if you're not a professional, then obviously you're not going to replace the strings as much. But they're a very good string for people who, they want that compromise. And they're probably the most popular kind of string for intermediate to advanced players. Some really good examples of a synthetic core string would be like a D'Addario Zayek strings, or the Pirastro Eudoxa. Those are very popular strings because both of them, produce that really warm sound, but yet they're very powerful as well. So guys, I hope I've answered a few questions. And if you have any other questions about strings, I answer most of the comments for my YouTube videos. So go ahead and comment below or ask me any kind of questions. And if you like this free content, if you find it valuable, just hit that subscribe button and hit that alert bell so you get a notification when I create a new video, which is like every week. And don't forget, here at Kennedy Violins, we're all players and teachers. So we're always happy to answer any of your questions anytime. Thanks, guys.